Hello, my name is Toby and welcome to the first Max3D review. It's a privilege for me that the first Max3D review will be of Stoke 2.0. Part of Stoke began its life under the codename Ember while Thinkbox software pushed out Stoke 1.0. I'll get back to Ember in a bit, but here's where I feel some of the confusion lies and why Stoke 2.0 hasn't spread as quickly as it should have. Stoke 1.0 was basically a tool to create new particles and advect them through a number of different velocity sources. These could be space warps, particle systems, Fume Effects, Krakatoa, PRTs, and so on. The great thing about it was that you can often operate a low-resolution simulation. Take this now old example where I simulated 100,000 particles in Naiad and then used Stoke 1.0 to generate 45 million particles that followed the Naiad velocities perfectly, drastically reducing the simulation time I would have had to do in order to get that number of particles in a Naiad sim. The founder of Thinkbox software also pushed the idea of mixing and matching different velocity sources, so if a client wanted 50% of one example and 50% of another, you could add both and set them to contribute 50% each. I don't know how popular Stoke 1.0 was, but I did not see a lot of activity in the community. Here's another example done with Stoke 1.0 and rendered in Krakatoa that may be what you think its main purpose is. Now, Stoke 2.0 is so much more than Stoke 1.0 ever was. I personally feel it was a mistake to label it 2.0 as that would suggest an upgrade to the tools that existed in 1.0. At some point Thinkbox decided to roll all Ember functionality into Stoke 2.0. Ember was designed to give the user universal velocity control in 3ds Max, which we've never had before, unlike say Houdini, where you can extrapolate velocities from anything and use it across any of its FX tools. Thinkbox didn't stop there, they also decided to roll Genome into Stoke 2.0. Genome is a powerful node-based procedural modifier, and my guess as to why I don't see it widely used is perhaps because it can initially seem quite complex to use, with not many great examples of what it's capable out there. I was initially one of those artists, but once I started using it I realized what tremendous potential it has and how powerful it really is. All that said, I still haven't covered all of what's part of Stoke 2.0, so to properly review Stoke 2, I need to divide it into the following categories: Stoke emitter and fields, universal velocity control, particle flow specific velocity control, Stoke sim and OpenVDB support, export to Fume Effects, field map, and Genome. Let's start with the Stoke emitter. The Stoke emitter is largely the same as the one in Stoke 1.0, but with some added functionality. It's still a particle emitter that emits particle from a given source and runs it through one or several velocities with settings for how much each velocity source should contribute. An example of this is this tornado example done completely in Stoke that was set up in less than 15 minutes. By putting in some more work, I believe I could make this good enough for a very solid background tornado without having to use a fluid simulator. The main difference with the Stoke emitter in 2.0 as opposed to 1.0 is that you now have a tool called Field Magma. This is a voxel grid with a Magma interface. Magma interface being Thinkbox's node editor that's used for pretty much everything you do in Stoke. Using the Field Magma, I quickly used a spline to create these velocities that drive the tornado. I added a bit of vector noise, but of course it would need more work for it to look convincing. It's simply a quick proof of concept. Everything in Stoke is built around fields, and when I say fields, I mean voxel fields. I'm not gonna cover this at great length, but voxels have been around for a while, and is the reason why we have tools like Fume Effects, Phoenix FD, and Hybrido in RealFlow. Instead of the amount of particles, it's the size of the voxels that really matter. Think of a voxel field as a box filled with little cubes. The lower the spacing, i.e. the the size of the cube, the more accurate the voxel field is going to be when information is put into it. Field magma in Stoke is a voxel grid, and its spacing value is what controls the resolution. Later on, when I talk about Fume Effects support, the spacing in field magma is exactly the same as the spacing setting in Fume Effects. Before I cover field magma, I'm going to cover magma just a little bit. It may seem confusing at first, but Thinkbox support staff are incredibly helpful on their forums to beginners and are very responsive. There are also many tutorials on their website where you can begin to learn magma. I'm very familiar with node-driven interfaces, but I was a bit intimidated at first. Now it feels like second nature for the most part. If you stick with it, you will reap the rewards. I would personally like a few changes to the interface, but it's still very nice the way it is. Do expect to spend some time before it completely makes sense to you, but know that once you know it, that knowledge will transfer to all aspects of Stoke, as well as Thinkbox's very popular Krakatoa plugin, and most likely whatever else they have cooking in the future. On that note, I want to mention that you can request a demo version of Krakatoa from Thinkbox, and the PRT loader, the PRT volume, the PRT hair, as well as the magma modifier for PRTs have no restrictions. Only the renderer itself has restrictions. This means you can't save out PRT, so the PRT loader might not be so useful, but the PRT volume, PRT hair are very useful. This is important as I very often use Krakatoa PRT tools in combination with Stoke. With this tornado, I used PRT hair to convert a spline to PRTs and then used the tangents to convert them to velocities. Field magma is useful in many ways. Here you can see me using it to view the velocities of a max space warp. I could use other sources like Fume Effects, Phoenix Feed FT, RealFlow's bin format, the particle sources, and so on. Now we start getting to the really exciting part, the universal velocity control. Have you ever wanted to sculpt your own velocities and use it with any plugin for Max, built-in or third-party? With Stoke 2.0's Field Force you now can. Here's a quick helicopter example I did hooked up to Max's built-in hair. I'm using the distance from the rotor blades to control the strength of my custom velocity, so the closer the helicopter gets to the grass, the stronger the velocity's effect on the grass are. And the center is of course in the middle of the helicopter. Since the blades are rotating slowly, you can see that it's actually using the shape of the blades. Taking one step further, here's an example where I don't want to affect the hairs that are within a geometry object that is simply a geometry object that says Stoke. This is all set up in Field Magma, and then using Field Force it becomes like any other space warp. So you can create your own custom velocities for any plugin that accepts space warps as input, like Glue 3D, Phoenix FD, Thinking Particles, and so on. Here's another example using Max's built-in cloth. This feature alone is worth the asking price in my opinion. Using the Magma Editor inside Field Magma, there's no velocity that I can imagine not being able to create. One neat example I found is by using the excellent Fur Guide Painter by Clovis Gay, I can literally sculpt velocities on a mesh by using its tools. Fur Guide Painter also has a really neat feature as shown in this video where spline guides will radiate from one or more selected vertices by just the click of a button. With good topology, you can get very fast results this way. Here's another example I did with particles running down the topology of a human male. Stoke 2.0 also includes specific particle flow nodes. Even though you can use the field force, you do want to use the particle flow nodes most of the time because space warps in Max by default accelerate indefinitely. Using the custom particle flow nodes, you can now make sure this doesn't happen, as illustrated by this torus example. We can also control other aspects such as spin, scale, and so on. This gives users a great deal of control over their particles, and of course also works with the physics tools in particle flow. Next I want to talk about Stoke Sim. Stoke Sim by default stores everything in the OpenVDB format, which is great since you can exchange everything you do in Stoke with other software that supports the popular voxel standard. There are read notes for OpenVDB as well, but I'll get back to those later. In this case, I made a very simple example using a tutorial from Thinkbox's site. The benefit of Stoke Sim over Field Magma is that you can refer to the previous frame. In this case, we're using it to our benefit by creating a wet map by using the distance of particles to the plane, and then each frame we fade off the previous frame's value so that we get trails. It's important to note that these are in 3D space. I found that the Stoke Sim is a bit slow, but I also have no real reference points, so perhaps this is actually very fast. You can of course submit the Stoke Sim to your farm, but you do need Stoke 2.0 licenses or Stoke Sim licenses on the machines that you want to simulate on. Shown briefly in this example is the field map, so this leads me into the next feature. Field map is a 3D map that lets you pick any channel from any field like Field Magma or Field Sim. Again, this is a 3D map, so this can be used in any scenario where you need a 3D map. Here you can see an arm where I have some particles moving around it, set up using Field Magma and Particle Flow. Using another magma that takes a distance from each particle and puts it into a color channel, I can pick that with the field map. As you can see, I can now render out my arm with this field map and get the colors that I defined in my magma flow. I can use this field map to blend between materials, use it as a bump map, or use it to control the subsurface scattering value or any other channel in the material editor. There's a huge potential with field map for what you can do. Then there's Fume Effects export support. This means that any channels you create in a field object such as Field Magma can be exported to one of Fume Effects' channels, including smoke, temperature, color, and more. There are many uses for this. One would be because Fume Effects renders voxels way faster than Krakatoa. Another example would be setting up a Field Magma with defined values for temperature, smoke, and velocity, export them in place, and then run Fume Effects starting from that file. In this semi-magical looking tornado example, I exported some velocities I had set up not very differently from the earlier Stoke emitter example from a Field Magma to Fume Effects' velocity channel. I then loaded it into a Fume Effects container. This Fume Effects container served as my velocity source by using Fume Effects source helper and putting it into a new Fume Effects container. This was set up in an hour and simulated in another few hours. The curly motion is from using vector noise in Magma, and knowing how it looks, I get extremely predictable velocities in my simulation. The reason for using Fume Effects source helper instead of field force is because I found this to be way faster. I've also sculpted clouds with PRT volume and some fairly complex magma, and then exported them to Fume Effects for rendering. I use this all the time, and I can't imagine using Fume Effects without Stoke 2.0. If you don't own Krakatoa or Fume Effects, you can still render voxels using Stoke 2.0's atmospheric effect that lets you pick a field and render it. Compared to Fume Effects, it's very slow, but it's there for people who don't have any other options for rendering voxels. We're nearing the end of the review now, but we got two features still to cover. Exporting and importing OpenVDB is one of them. I created these clouds in Houdini and exported them as OpenVDB and specified a channel. I loaded the OpenVDB into Stoke 2.0, and I had to do some repositioning inside Magma Editor since Max's coordinate system has C as up while Houdini has Y as up. I also had to do some scaling inside Magma Editor, but it was all very easy. As you can see from these renders, the clouds look exactly the same, rendered in Houdini's mantra as it does in Max after exported the OpenVDB voxels to Fume Effects. The render times were much faster in Fume Effects for the same quality, but you will run out of RAM after a certain amount of voxels in Fume Effects, while Houdini is able to render many more, but of course at the expense of render time. You can also render the voxels with Krakatoa. There's even a tool in Stoke that lets you convert the voxels to PRTs. All of this is absolutely fantastic. Using OpenVDB, you can now do any kind of voxel work in Houdini or Max and then transfer it to the other application. This makes effects CDs working in Houdini or Max able to collaborate with each other much easier. Last but not least, we come to Genome. Genome, as mentioned earlier, lets you do geometry modifications or selections using Magma. Here I'm setting up a modifier similar to push, and then adding the ability to mask it using a texture map. This is a very simple example, but so much more can be done, and it's very fast. I can now save this out as a preset and access it quickly using the preset option. Genome is perhaps a little bit trickier to pick up than using Magma for particles, because you're dealing with geometry and often the concept of loop nodes, but don't let that scare you off. What's really cool about Genome is that you can install it on every computer in your studio, but if only one artist is creating Magma flows, they can save out presets and any other user can load those presets, change values without having to own a license of Genome. Over time you'll build up a great library of custom modifiers done in Genome that everyone in your studio can use as easily as any other modifier. Right off the bat, I'm going to say that Stoke 2.0 is going to get a 5 out of 5 from me. It's an essential set of plugins for FX3Ds using 3ds Max. No matter what your plugin of choice is, Stoke 2.0 supports it as long as the plugin in question supports space warps. The biggest feature Stoke brings to the table is a level of velocity control that we've never had before. So whether you're using Thinking Particles, Hair Farm or Natrix Glue 3D, Phoenix FDE, you will, in my opinion, want to check out Stoke for this feature alone. Next big thing for me is direct Fume Effects support. I've used Fume Effects since its first alpha, and now that I'm able to export Magma flows into Fume specific channels like color, temperature, fuel and so on, it helps me get predictable results much quicker. Direct particle flow support is great and gives us much more control than Space Force would, including but not limited to rotation scale, script support and much more. OpenVDB import and export support is also fantastic and allows 3ds Max users to exchange voxel data with other software that supports OpenVDB, such as Houdini. Using this you can simulate the effects in Houdini but render them in Max, or the other way around. This opens new doors for collaboration between Houdini and Max users. Genome is a fantastic plugin that is really fast at modifying vertex, face positions and selection sets procedurally. I feel there are some small things missing, but considering the package I can't complain, which leads me to the last major pro, value. The velocity control alone would have had me buy the plugin, but everything else that's included makes this a fantastic deal. Of the few complaints I have, I would say that the Stoke sim speed is one of them. I don't really have a reference point, but it seems pretty slow to me. The web map example I demonstrated took fairly long to simulate, and it seemed like a fairly straightforward sim. I also feel that the PRT viewport speed could be improved. With the amount of PRTs I often work with in production, this is a part I would really like to see some speed improvements. The voxel display is not as nice as Houdini's, and this makes it a bit of an impact. In Houdini you can see transparent voxels, which makes it easy to get an early preview of especially how your smoke, cloud and fire effects are looking as you're working on them. The last one is a feature I've had some disagreements with one of the developers about, and that's GPU support. I see GPU support as the future. It's a powerful processor connected with extremely high bandwidth to a very high speed RAM, with each generation of cartridges getting more and more RAM, with the next line of consumer cards from NVIDIA rumored to have at least 4 GB on a card. If you put 2 of those in SLI mode, you have 8 GB of RAM, and that's not including the professional series that has even more RAM. ILM has demonstrated how useful it's been for their in-house solvers, with feature film quality explosion previews taking only 10 minutes to generate and finals taking only an hour to simulate, with both sims behaving exactly the same, but the longer one having some nicer detail. The faster everything gets for us artists, the more time it leaves us to be creative. All that said, Stoke 2.0 is a fantastic piece of software. It's very innovative, and I can't wait to see what Thinkbox has up its sleeve for the future. I hope you enjoyed the first Max3D video review, and please comment if you have any questions about the software, either in the YouTube comments or on the Facebook Max3D page, with the link displayed right now on the video.